Okay, well, hello everybody, welcome, and thanks very much for joining this AFN Network Plus webinar on time to throw off nanny state fears. What do UK citizens want from their food? We are really pleased to have Mhairi Brown from the Food, Farming and Countryside Commission presenting to us today. Mhairi is going to be giving us a sort of sneaky peek at her report that's coming out next week, which is based on 2 years worth of conversations with citizens around the country about what they really want from their food. So just a bit of housekeeping before I sort of introduce Mhairi properly. I'm Jez Fredenburgh. I will be your chair today. I'm based at the School of Environmental Sciences at the University of East Anglia, where I'm the Knowledge Exchange Fellow for the AFN Network Plus. If you've not joined us before, AFN is a UKRI funded project focused on identifying research gaps that could help reduce emissions in the agri-food system and move us towards net zero by 2050. We've got about 3,000 people now in the network, which is a kind of excellent group of collective knowledge. So please join us if you haven't already. I know my colleague John will be putting links in the chat shortly. And yeah, just a heads up, like if my internet was to go or something, then my colleague John Haslam, who's based at the University of York, he would step in, and he's on with us right now. So today's topic: for too long, government has been told that people don't want things to change. You've probably heard a lot of the usual excuses, like nobody wants a nanny state, businesses only make what people want to buy, most people just want cheap food, and so on and so on. But is any of this actually true? Or are these just kind of lobbyist lines designed to kind of undermine political change? So the FFCC's food conversation has set out to find out, essentially. Over 2 years, they've hosted 12 assemblies with a diverse set of citizens around the country from different sorts of communities. And the overarching question has always been, so what do we really want from our food? So to dig into this, Mhairi is going to present to us for about 20 minutes. Then we will have an audience Q&A. And we've got Mhairi until about 11:30. So, if there are enough questions, we will keep going till then. So please make the most of this time with her. She's got really, really interesting insights. If you can put your questions in the Q&A box, that would be great. And leave the chat just for, sharing links and things like that. Because we're getting a lot of questions now in these webinars, and it's quite difficult for me to find your questions if you're putting them in the chat. So put them in the Q&A box. I can find them nice and easily, and we'll get as many answered as possible. So Mhairi, if you'd like to get your slides ready, and I will just give you a proper introduction. So Mhairi is head of food futures at the Food, Farming and Countryside Commission. She is a registered nutritionist specialising in public health and food policy. Prior to joining FFCC, Mhairi led policy and international work at Consensus Action on Salt, Sugar and Health, where she collaborated with stakeholders to translate this work globally. So Mhairi, over to you.
Thank you so much, Jez. Thank you for the invitation to speak today. And good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here today. It's a real pleasure to talk to you. So as Jez was saying, the food conversation is a 2-year project to date. It's still ongoing, where we've been asking people across the country what they really think about food and what they want from the food system. And there are many dominant narratives in the media and from politicians that people really don't care, that they just want cheap food. They don't want a nanny state. And it's meant a lack of really serious action in the food system. There are many policies that are kind of ready to go and could be implemented, but they've been hit by delays and the non-implementation of these policies. And so we knew it was time to hear from citizens themselves. So I'm going to start by telling you a little bit about what we did with the food conversation. So we set out to answer that question of what people want from food using 2 interconnected but distinct approaches. So at the kind of the core of the food conversation, we have national deliberations or public dialogues, which include a diverse range of people who are broadly representative of the nation. And then we have community-led conversations using a toolkit so that communities and grassroots organisations can explore food issues that are more relevant to them. And alongside all of this, we have a policy advocacy stream that really makes sure that citizens' voices are reaching decision makers and connecting the participants with policymakers directly. And the national deliberations have been designed carefully to move beyond the kind of more simple polling that would normally inform policy. We drew on established principles of citizens' assemblies and public dialogues that have been shown to be effective in addressing these really complex societal issues. So, for example, in France, Belgium, and even Scotland, there are climate assemblies that run using similar methodology. Ireland's citizens' assemblies are another example, where representative groups of the population have put forward recommendations, and this has led to constitutional amendments around things like same-sex marriage. And so to recruit participants, we worked with the Sortition Foundation, who implemented a civic lottery, and they sent out more than 118,000 invitations to randomly selected addresses across 12 locations. From those who responded, 345 were then selected using an algorithm that balances age, gender, ethnicity, socioeconomic background, and political leanings as well. And we launched the deliberations in summer 2023 with a proof of concept phase, which took place in Birmingham in Cambridgeshire. We then had a national condensed lightning deliberation in March 2024. And then we moved across the UK, and you can see the details of where we went, but we were in all 4 nations up until September of last year. And we had a consistent structure across the deliberations of 4 online workshops, finishing with a final in-person session where the participants were then able to bring together all of their findings and create their manifestos for change. We couldn't cover the entire food system with the time available to us in this project. And so we focused around 4 key themes, which were justice and power, the food environment and health, farming, climate and nature, and how policy is made. And throughout, we wanted to know the change that people wanted and the solutions that they wanted brought into place. And so to help the participants do that, we gave them a list of around 40 policy proposals that have been proposed previously from sources such as the National Food Strategy, from UKRI funded research, from other NGOs and charities. So they're building on the wonderful work that's already happened in the sector. And then in each session, we debated a list of these policies and thought through trade-offs and unintended consequences of them. For the community conversations, we launched a toolkit in 2024, and that includes the materials that were developed and delivered at that national level. So it gives a really consistent foundation for these discussions around food. And the toolkit makes it easy for anyone to host a conversation, whether that's in person or online. There's ready-made session plans, activities, and the videos. And community hosts can also adapt these materials to the local context and often integrate food sharing into their events. Many of them have taken place in person. And we provide a reporting template which captures the key themes and insights of them. So to date, there's been 70 plus conversations so far, involving more than 1,200 people, again, in all 4 nations. And when we launched the toolkit, we partnered with some organisations who have good reach into communities, including Sustainable Food Places, Amazing Communities Together, Community Organisers, and the Felix Project. So I'm going to move on now to what we've heard. And this covers findings from the national level and the local level. There was real strong similarities in the key themes that were coming out of these conversations. So we found that rather than not caring about food, there are several areas that people are really concerned about, even frustrated or angry about, and they brought these concerns to the conversation. So they're really concerned about power imbalances with too much influence from big food companies and supermarkets, and they feel that profit is prioritised over health. They're concerned about government inaction and what they think is a lack of effective policy and even a lack of leadership to steer meaningful change. And they think there's a lack of transparency. They think it's unclear who has access to decision makers. They talked a lot about lobbying and even political donations. Thinking about health and nutrition, ultra processed food are a real concern for the participants. They're viewed as ubiquitous and harmful, especially for children. And people are frustrated that they're marketed so heavily. Many are concerned about the cheap food that does dominate the options available to them and the gap then to the cost in more nutritious food, and are worried about how that is driving choices. On environment and farming, people are concerned about the environment and environmental degradation. They're worried about industrial farming and the impact of fertilizers and the long-term viability of these types of methods. They're also worried about worsening weather and the impact this has on people growing food. And many are concerned about farmers as humans in the system, about their ability to make a fair living, about what the future looks like for them, and the barriers that are in place for them to adopt more sustainable practices. And looking broader, more kind of cultural or social concerns, many feel disconnected from where food comes from and from nature and countryside more broadly. They're worried about food deserts and the disappearance of kind of small, more local food companies, and feel that that's worsened the problem. But despite all of their concerns, there is a real sense of hope and optimism about many things. There is widespread hope that communities could be a way forward, that strengthening community-led food hubs and reconnecting people with local producers can restore trust and health and a sense of resilience. There's faith that stronger governance and clear food plans and dedicated departments or a minister in charge of overseeing this could really drive systemic change. And there's a lot of enthusiasm for a shift to something more sustainable, for something more healthy, for more sustainable farming methods and rebalancing the system so that it works for communities, for farmers, for nature. But they only think that this change is possible if the power imbalances in the system can be addressed. So they really want to be part of that change to help add another voice into the policymaking process and be partners in achieving that shift to a better food system. There's a range of actions that the citizens support, and these are just a few on the screen. But their solutions in general are quite practical and systemic. So they do want to see national food strategies with cross-party support. They think it's essential to lay out kind of a roadmap of where everybody needs to be working towards. They want tougher regulations on unhealthy food, particularly stricter advertising restrictions. And they want much more transparency requirements for food companies. They'd like to see a range of subsidies, helping farmers with fairer pricing systems and helping citizens with expanded measures like the Healthy Start programme to make sure that people who really do need that support can access nourishing food in the immediate term. They also want taxes on more harmful practices, their support for things like windfall taxes and polluter pays mechanisms. And then there's strong support for measures that are seen as much more kind of no-brainers, universal free school meals and strict nutrition standards in earlier settings, and a real sense of outrage as to why they aren't already in place. Across the locations that we went to, the participants brought a slightly different emphasis to the change that they wanted to see. There was really strong consensus overall. But in Wales, for example, local food access was a dominant theme, and there was strong support for community food hubs to support local economies. In Northern Ireland, there was a clear call for a national policy on sustainable agriculture. Participants were especially vocal about unfair pricing for farmers there. In Scotland, there was an emphasis on environmental protection and criminalising environmental harm, as well as tackling food waste. And then in South London, we heard the strongest concerns about power imbalances, about corporate power and unethical marketing. Terms like greed were used in South London. And then finally in West Yorkshire and East Kent, there was a clear push for higher food standards for schools and for hospitals. So at the end of their time with us, the citizens developed manifestos of actions that could achieve the change that they want to see. Across the process, we had more than 40 manifestos. And when we analysed these, there was 5 kind of core themes that were really prominent. And in March of this year, we launched the Citizen Manifesto to Fix Food, which communicates those 5 key themes. And we developed this with the participants. This is now on our website, and I think there's a link in the chat to it, but I'll just run through this quickly. Some of those key asks include joined up leadership. So citizens really want to see much more cooperation across UK nations and sharing what works, creating those national food strategies, involving people in citizen assemblies and other forums that can involve other actors in the system as well, giving people a voice in shaping policies that affect them, as well as putting limits on corporate influence so that decisions can prioritise what's good for all. Food environment, so they frame this as real choice for everyone, that ultra processed food and those kind of worst offenders, the most unhealthy food, should be phased out. We need stronger advertising restrictions, and there should be measures in place so that nourishing food is really a choice available for everyone. Better food and less waste. So coming back to the idea of kind of standards in public procurement, they thought these types of standards were necessary to create a level playing field and make schools and hospitals and other public institutions kind of the trendsetter, the kind of what good looks like, where nutritious and sustainable food is served. They really wanted food waste tackled from farm to fork with UK-wide targets in place, and cutting down on excessive plastic packaging as well. Building on their concerns for farmers, they want a fairer deal for farmers, and so that includes measures like fair pricing rules for farmers, financial support for them to adopt more sustainable practices, and much more carefully designed regulation that would prevent a handful of corporations from dominating supply chains and pricing. And then finally, flourishing local food. So really that investment into the local areas, into local food hubs, enabling farmers to sell more locally for local businesses to thrive. They want more land available for community food growing programs, and they want food growing, cooking and sharing of food to be integrated into school curriculums. And really building on this process that they've been through, they think that children should have a good view of the food system and have more opportunities to connect with food. So this manifesto was launched just last month at an event in the House of Lords. Daniel Zeichner attended and heard from some of the participants who took part in this. And he spoke about the food strategy currently being developed by DEFRA and how he wanted to include citizens in some way and their appetite for change in that strategy. Which brings me on to what does this all mean for government? So I think above all, the food conversation has shown overwhelmingly the support for change. It's a real mandate for government to act. It hasn't unleashed a long list of new asks into the system, but rather has shown where the appetite for intervention is, and really people understand and support change across many areas. The food conversation reveals that citizens don't simply want cheap food above all else. They are concerned about many aspects of the food system, and They think it should be easier to get to healthy food, but that's not simply about cost for them. They want to see many more opportunities to find nourishing food. They want to see less of the unhealthy options. But they also accept that it is complex. In their discussions, they talked about price and pricing offers as being a major driver of what they do end up buying, but feel that it's the system that has led to that outcome. And so they want to see that change. Citizens across all political leanings called for stronger government leadership and regulation. And they think food is too important to just be left to the market. They don't think in silos, and they see systems. And so when they are talking about interventions, they want things that will impact positively on many areas of the food system. We often hear that citizens aren't able to understand that complexity, or shouldn't be involved at that level in food policy making. And what we've heard is so different. It's really practical and solutions focused, and really aligns with many of the solutions that have come out of other assemblies and citizens' juries and public dialogues. What they've called for is valuable and interesting, but I think it's also important for policymakers to think about the values that people bring to thinking about food. And what we found is that above all, fairness is really a core value. Participants are troubled by the imbalances in power that they see. They note the contradiction that the UK has one of the cheapest food baskets in Europe, but still we have high levels of food insecurity and food-related ill health. They value a system that would reward hard work and ensure fair pay, and allows everyone to afford nutritious food. And they really question that framing that shoppers want to or must choose between good food and cheap food, and instead propose policies that make those nutritious, sustainable options much more available. And so policymakers should recognise that policies that tackle power relationships to tilt the scales towards public interest, and really link to that quite British sense of fairness, would likely gain strong support. What we heard is that implementation is really key. People want action. They see that there's a lot of policies that have been proposed, and they really want government to start implementing now. They talked a lot about the advertising restrictions, which are due to come into place later this year. They were supposed to be in place many years ago, but faced a lot of lobbying from industry. Many companies do have healthier products that they can advertise instead, and research has shown that the revenues don't decrease once these restrictions come into place, but still they're fought against. And citizens really question that and say that they think these restrictions should be going further, that unhealthy food and food that's industrial produced, that's very convenient, shouldn't be advertised, but we should focus now on raising awareness of what's healthy and what's good for everyone. They are aware of different kind of policies and strategies in place. As we worked across all 4 nations, we did talk to them about different measures in place, like the Good Food Nation Act in Scotland. And the citizens were questioning this, it's not enough for Scotland to have that in place if it's going to work. It should be replicated across the country. And so they really do value that sharing and cooperation across nations. And they really want to be part of that. And I think that's the most important thing I could say is, as part of the food conversation, is the appetite for being involved, for being part of the change, and for being partners with government. They really want to stay involved within this process, but they think that other citizens should have this opportunity as well. So they want to see things like assemblies or different forums set up. They want citizens to have a seat at the table, but it's not just about them. They see a need for smaller businesses, more local businesses, to have a seat, as well as farmers. And they see these democratic processes as a way forward. With that, I'm going to stop sharing and happy to take questions.
Thanks so much, Mhairi. That was really great. We've got lots of questions coming in. I just wanted to just kick off with one just around understanding, I guess just getting a little bit more clarity on things. Um, Obviously, like in these conversations, um, I know you've got those different themes that you
Mm.
were talking about. How the conversation worked? Did you almost sort of, I don't want to say educate, but put forward information, let's say, to the
Mm.
citizens before you discussed it? Because I'm interested in whether um, have the opinions come from just their own knowledge and their own experiences, or are they kind of slightly as a result of being sort of informed, let's say, through the
Mm.
process?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that's a key question for this type of methodology with deliberations when they are run well, and really robustly and carefully designed. The main aim of these processes is for people to discuss things together and to hear different perspectives and to really understand that what they experience as individuals is not unique to them, that this is shared across many people. And so within the workshops, the participants did hear from experts and they had a chance to do Q&A with those experts. But the majority of the time then was discussing what they've heard, relating to what they see and feel within their communities, within their day-to-day life, and then turning to policy proposals and really kind of pulling those apart and thinking about how that would impact them, but also the people around them. And so it's really key for us within that process that we recruited a really representative group of people so that we didn't just have, a room of Guardian readers who would all think the same way and all support the same things, but that we could really get a diverse range of opinions in there. So I would say that maybe some people found that evidence really useful and really aligned with it. We've heard people who completely rejected it and didn't align with that. But I think most of all, it's people just unlocking a little bit and investigating what they think and what they feel.
Okay, interesting. Thank you. Um, Question here from Glenn at Sustain. How might this work to date play into deliberations around the food strategy deliberation process and the Citizens Advisory Panel DEFRA has announced as part of that process, which he says he thinks FFCC is linked with?
Mm-hmm. Yes, there's not a whole lot I can say about our involvement at the moment because nothing's completely final, but we are hopeful that our citizens could play a role within that. I think it's a really positive step that DEFRA are looking to involve citizens. It does feel like a bit of a culture change, particularly with the reaction to the Food Strategy Advisory Board and the kind of the industry voices that were on there. It does, I think, show a commitment from them to hearing different voices. What that ends up looking like, though, I think is really important that there will be many industry voices, many civil society voices within this, and we need to make sure that citizens also have an opportunity for that. So, citizen involvement in the food strategy can't just be a council. It does need to be a bit of a wider process with citizens. And I think we've shown here what can work with a national robust deliberation, but also with these community conversations that are happening in place with people who understand their local system, who know what will work, who have seen many things happen and know what's needed for their communities. So yes, I think it's positive, and I hope that that is the approach that's taken forward.
Do you see it as more something that is happening could happen at a more, regional, local level, and then sort of feeds up to some sort of super council or something? Like, what might that look like?
I think that would be, yeah, I do. I mean, there's definitely a benefit into these kind of nationally representative, meetings and workshops. But I think when we're talking about implementation, we do need to think a bit more about a regional level. We've seen so many strategies launched at this national level that just don't really go anywhere. And so by working with people, the citizens, farmers, local businesses in these regional levels, hopefully that would be a way to move forward.
Are there any examples that you know of where that's happening already? I mean, I know, for example, I've been looking into developing webinar on this because people keep asking about, what local councils can do.
Mhm.
Are there any examples where this sort of citizen assembly is already being used effectively to develop strategies at a more local level?
Yeah, so there are examples across Europe. So in France, there's a real commitment to work much more at a local level. I think these are quite in early stages. I think that's key for this kind of DEFRA process, that if it was to happen in this way, it would be world leading, and other countries would then look to us to implement that out. But yes, we do see across countries in Europe where there are these kind of equivalents to food partnerships in place that have a real voice, that are able, with good investment, are able to make changes. So there's definitely precedent for that.
Thank you. Question here. This goes back from Marilla Hart, a little bit more what I was asking about earlier. So I'm wondering how strong the consensus was around these five key issues. The ones I'm guessing she means the ones that came up from the Citizen Manifesto.
Yeah.
Were sorry, hang on a minute. Were there also people who saw highly processed food and popular brands like McDonald's, for example, as part of their culture? She said, I ask this because when Jamie Oliver was pushing for more nutritious school meals, he had backlash with some parents who were handing McDonald's through the school fence to their kids. I think we all remember that one. But it's actually a really important question, isn't it? Because a lot of like ultra processed food and unhealthy food like fish and chips and things like that is sort of embedded in our culture and more so probably in certain communities than others as well. How do we, what was the kind of feeling around that?
Yeah. Yeah, I love that question. I would say that in their discussions, I mean, the citizens really acknowledged the complexity of this and talked about the kind of contradictions that were coming up for them while they were discussing this, that they want the most nutritious food, the best quality food for everyone in the community, but the realities of achieving that are people reflecting on their own children and what they would, and how do you just get food on the table and food into hungry tummies. But they also talked about UPFs as kind of creeping up on them and
Okay.
slowly kind of replacing what they know. We had older participants talking about, there used to be a greengrocers and a bakers and a fishmongers in town, and now there's just one or two places to go to and they have the same things over and over again. And so I think what the citizens would like to see is not getting rid of everything and going to, doing a complete 180, but starting to reintroduce those really nutritious foods and more opportunities locally to enjoy a good healthy meal that's reasonably priced, and working as a community to achieve that. So I don't think they see it as kind of something that is going to happen overnight, but something that they can just gradually change that change, as well as embedding education as well. I think that's really key. Education on food systems and trying to create a healthier food culture above all, is something they think is key for sustainability of any kind of policy.
I think your point earlier was very interesting about their idea that we shouldn't just you shouldn't have to choose between cheap food and good food. Can you say a little bit more about that? Did they have any ideas about how you tackle that? Like what sorts of policies or mechanisms might be useful to ensure that healthy food is also sort of affordable food?
Yeah, I think they were quite clear that they recognized they probably weren't going to be able to pay less in a system that does work better. And so they did talk about being willing to pay more if they were kind of involved in that process and understood where that change had come from. What they see now is kind of things getting smaller, but prices not getting any cheaper. But ultimately, there being quite a gap between what's cheap and what is more nutritious. They talked a lot about the need to rebalance that system, and so bringing in things like regulation and taxes that would really tackle that kind of what they described as like a dominance of the unhealthy food companies. Tackle that with regulations, make it a bit fairer, allow smaller companies to come much more into the fore and much more into what's available in their local areas. And then they also talked about, I think much more so in the local conversations as well, about affordability. And so for the need for these kind of voucher programs that do help people just get food, like a Healthy Start or a Better Start in Scotland. Yeah, just making sure that people who do need food immediately, that there are measures there, and moving away from this kind of culture of food banks, and just a real sense of outrage around those, but no clear ideas of how we're going to be able to move away from that in the short term, but really focusing on rebalancing that system.
Interesting, thank you. Christina, I hope that answers your question. I've just seen it pretty much is the same question as that. Please write again if it wasn't. Question from Sandra from Climate Change Committee. Nice to see you on here, Sandra. We had Sandra presenting a few weeks ago. Says, under the nature/climate change theme that you were talking to citizens about, did you talk to them about the need to reduce meat consumption as the key way to reduce emissions from food? And then she's put in brackets, and to support healthier diets. And I guess, how did that go? What was the sort of feeling on that?
Yeah. So I think the evidence that was presented to them was a little bit more general about emissions, and talking about the types of emissions that come from different food groups. I would say that I had a sense when I was observing the workshops that there was already an understanding about the need to eat less meat from the citizens themselves, and talking about kind of the practicalities of doing that. When we then spoke to them about ultra processed food, and when that conversation was happening, they were saying, oh, if we were to move away from meat and go to a meat alternative, is that more processed, and how do we navigate that? But I think overall, there was a sense that it's probably something that is needed. That if we can start to rebalance the system and make healthier food a lot more available, that it's something that could naturally happen. But equally, they would really welcome much more public messaging that's yeah, I would say in general what we talked to them about related to the environment. What landed well was when it was practical and tangible, and was related to things like food heritage and long-term viability, as opposed to something that might be a little bit more ideological. If they understand the kind of the reasons for it and the way forward with it, then there was a sense that they could get on board with that.
Okay, yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it?
Yeah.
Did you talk to them at all? Because I know other people have kind of, I think it might have been the Green Alliance who looked at and like the idea of meat tax, and found that something like a meat tax was seen as really not favourable by citizens at all. Did you talk about sort of mechanisms in any way? What were their opinions on that?
Yes, we did talk to them quite generally about taxes, and I think we had the idea of a meat tax within there as well, which didn't come out as strong a support as some of these other, these windfall taxes or the polluter pays models were much more favourable. But I would say within that, they would see a polluter pays model potentially relating to something like industrial meat production, like industrial chicken farming, for example, and the need for the animals to have better welfare. And again, when you can relate it to those more tangible outcomes, that's when you could start to see support coming for things like that.
Was there an element of, I mean, you mentioned fairness a lot, like came up as a real overarching thing.
Yeah.
Did you get into conversations at all about, in a shift in terms of food, in terms of reducing meat consumption, what that looks like in terms of fairness for farmers and their livelihoods? did you go into that territory at all? And if so, how did they perceive that? Were they worried about it? Like, what did they think?
Yeah, I think we did have some farmers come speak directly to the citizens who spoke about the way that they want to farm and the way that they want to look after the animals that are on their farm and the challenges that they're up against to do that. And I think that landed quite strongly with the citizens. Ultimately, they are concerned, I think, with kind of within that context, that farmers have what they need now to make a living, and that there's long-term viability, that we can continue to invite more and more people to that profession as we progress. And so they were concerned that any policy that was brought in that might encourage a shift away from something that farmers currently can earn some money from, that's handled very carefully. And so that came back to an idea of, farmers needing to go through this process, or needing to have that seat at the table as well, to make sure that those views are heard too.
Brilliant, thank you. Question here. I wonder how much you saw people's opinions changing throughout the course of the assemblies and discussions. Did citizens start off, well, a little bit more like the question I asked right at the beginning, did they start off this well informed? Yeah, I think that's an interesting one. Like, did you see opinions change perhaps as they came together as well, as people shared their own experiences? What were, I'm guessing, because you had like a real mix of people, so you might have had someone very sort of potentially, well off, middle class, able to afford what they want, in a room with someone who can't afford what they want, not able to access the food that they want. How do those conversations form by bringing people together?
Yeah, I think just on that point, to begin with, on people being able to afford things and people not so able. What I had a sense of, and what really struck me, is that there is a sense of struggle across many people in terms of affording not just food, but they talked a lot about housing, about transport, about energy, and just rising costs. And with that, a real sense of care for people that are on lower incomes, regardless of their income, a sense of care for people that earn less than them, or who might live in a lower income area and struggle to access things. And so I think in terms of opinion shifting, what we saw most was their view of the solutions changing. So initially, within the first workshop, education or public awareness campaigns were really prominent in the types of solutions that they wanted to see. And as we started to kind of go through and talk about power, about how the food environment, about the impact on farmers, and then how policy is made, and kind of the different actors and voices involved within that, what we then started to see was the more kind of upstream or more systemic solutions starting to be discussed a lot more. So education was still a very core part of what they believe in, and creating, a better food culture as part of that. But from people who were maybe a little bit less favorable of government intervention, or the role of the state, then started to become, it was almost like I don't like this, but I do see that it's needed. It is just the way that the system is, and I hope that it wouldn't be that way forever, that the government would need to continue intervening in that way. So yeah, I think it was more about the solutions where we saw the biggest change, as opposed to knowledge of different areas.
The education one is an interesting one, I think, because I feel like I spend a lot of time in sort of food farming spaces where a lot of people say we just need to educate people, but I think often that it feels to me like often that view is coming from people who don't think that they need to be educated, but they feel like other people over there need to be educated about what to eat. And I just wondered, like, did you in these conversations where education came up, was it kind of people saying, well, the people here, people don't know what to eat, they need to be educated? Or was it actually people saying, I don't know, like where, how, what to eat. I'm struggling to understand like what is healthy now. There are so many messages.
Mm-hmm.
How did that kind of play out?
Yeah, I'd say that um that kind of first thought about people just need to know what to eat um was what we heard initially. And then as we went through the process and people could see how things interconnected, there was a real sense of, I I'm finding this really complex. And when I now go to my supermarket or when I'm going into my local community, what do I do? What do I need to do? And I think it's more than just kind of that that kind of messaging of what to eat, but it's something more practical and much more active, that people want those opportunities to actually connect with people who are producing food. They want children to have the opportunity to do the sort of farm visits, and just have a better appreciation of what's happening, because they do feel as though marketing and advertising and this kind of promotion of very convenient food has kind of pushed out that awareness of where our food comes from. And it was only people who work on allotments or, do actively grow their own food who could talk a bit more fully about the challenges associated with that. So yeah, it's a much broader sense of education that they mean.
Okay, thank you. So in terms of, there's a question here about what you talked about as well, like in terms of what the different themes that people talked about.
Mm.
Rob said, why wasn't the treatment of animals one of the themes that people were asked to consider?
Um, we talked to them about industrial chicken farming. Um, I would say that there was already a strong sense of concern about animal welfare from the participants. When we were designing the conversation, we did do a lot of research to see where the strongest kind of public views are, or similar processes, what the kind of themes are coming out of that. So we did talk to them in that kind of context about when meat is industrial produced, what impact does that have on the animals, and what could a better system look like, and what would that look like for the animals themselves and the kind of the lives they have. So it was definitely within there, but I would also say, yeah, that kind of concern for animal welfare was very strong for the citizens when they came into the conversation.
Is it something they brought up when you, like on their own, like when you weren't like you say talking to them about industrial chicken farming? Is it something that came up otherwise?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that was the second workshop, but even within the first workshop, we were hearing kind of concerns about animals, and yeah, it was definitely an underlying concern for them.
Yeah, thank you. Um, Question from Elizabeth Murray. I'm wondering if reaction to government intervention was tempered depending on food type. It says, did the study disaggregate reactions to different restrictions? For example, reducing ultra-processed food, these reducing meat consumption, or even reducing industrially produced meat, these locally produced meat. Does that
Mm,
does that question make sense
I
to
I
you,
think
Mhairi? I'm
so.
trying to get my head around it as well.
Yeah.
um, yeah, let's have a look. I'm wondering if reaction to government intervention. So I think she's asking about, yeah, like government policy, what can government do, government leadership, etc.
Mm.
Is different depending on the food type.
Um,
So, for example, should the government act on ultra processed food but not on reducing meat consumption, or should it act on um, intensively produced meat but not like local production, or should it do both? Or
yeah, and to be honest, I'm not sure that we got into that level of nuance, but what I would say is that when speaking about government intervention, they saw that as really essential to address power imbalances within the system. And so when they were talking about the types of actions that they want to see, they were talking much more broadly about government should set, standards in schools. It should, provide financial backing for farmers. I don't think we then got into the kind of the more intricacies about, what's the nuance within those policy actions. But I would say that there was also a very strong appetite for government intervention across many areas, and we will be publishing in our report kind of a graph of a voting exercise they did where they assessed these policies and said either do it, test it, debate it, or don't do it, and the kind of the levels of action they wanted government to take. And so I think some of the nuance will come through there, and where they are saying for government not to take action or to debate things a bit more, it's usually because that policy isn't strong enough or it doesn't go far enough. So hopefully that will show a bit of the nuance in their thinking as well.
Yeah, they want really clear, strong kind of government commitments. Okay.
Exactly. Yeah.
There's an anonymous question here, which I'm glad it's being asked. It's one I was going to ask you about as well. You've spoken about some of the differences in what systems prioritise by location. Were there any other key demographic dividing lines about what people wanted? For example, age, income, I guess gender, all those sorts of things, political leanings, that kind of thing.
We didn't, because the way that the conversations were recorded, all of everybody's contributions was anonymized, and then we analysed that to identify the key themes, and it was really important to do that so that we could analyse that data without going in with any sort of preconceived themes that we were looking for, that we could let the data show us what was really said. So we can't break it down by different demographics, but we did also last year and also at the end of 2023 do some national polling just to show to look at people's different political leanings and show level of support for government intervention. That is available on our website, but I would say that across all of the political leanings there was support for government intervention for measures to make things healthier, more sustainable. But yeah, we don't have that within our data.
Do you think it's something that needs to be looked at more closely? I'm just sort of thinking about potentially the colour of the next government. We're being told we might never know, we might have Nigel Farage as Prime Minister, and reform might sweep the board, and it's sort of an interesting one, I think, for people, probably a lot of people on this call, sort of wondering about how we create a kind of a consensus, like across, that transcends political boundaries, for why we need this change. Like why is, how can it be communicated that citizens across the board want change? I guess what I'm asking is, is there another piece of research that needs doing on trying to understand what different political demographics kind of really feel and want, do you think, so that can be better understood?
Yes, on one hand, I do think it is important to talk to people and to hear what they think in any shape or form. I think what has been the most useful about this process is being able to hear different perspectives and understand that we're not as divided as that kind of broader narrative would propose that we are. That is obviously not what political parties are going to do, but I think that's a case for having something like a citizen assembly or something like this, really set in stone, that can help inform policy making. It's really important. I mean, there's maybe a case for doing this type of processes at regional levels, at local levels, and hearing, the real range of voices within those areas where we were only able to do so much with this process. But moving forward, it would be really interesting to see, really dig deeper into the leanings of somebody in the north of England versus, you know, the south. I think there's definitely a case for doing much more of this and many more deliberations.
Thank you. Well, there's a couple of questions here about citizens' assemblies, particularly. So, Geraldine says, what kind of difficulties do citizens have around articulating their food-related issues? What do you think about the role of facilitators in these citizen assemblies at each region?
Yep. Just speaking from the experience of the food conversation, we actually worked with an independent partner called Hopkins Van Mill and TPX Impact as well, two organisations who facilitated these conversations with us so that we could have that kind of separation between us as FFCC and the process. And just seeing the facilitators in action and how they were able to make sure every voice was heard, but also the kind of the process they went through between workshops to analyze, you know, who had really been heard, who needed to be heard in the next workshop. I think there are difficulties for people to access this this type of process, and we were really clear that when we were doing it, we wanted it to be as inclusive as possible. So, for example, we sent people laptops and you know, Wi-Fi hotspots, and we gave them a lot of one-to-one support and checked in with them in between workshops, answered any questions they had, so that anybody who wanted to participate could come to this conversation and take part. And the facilitators were, a really central part to that as well.
Brilliant, thank you. Then there's a question from Glenn at Sustain, also around citizen assemblies. Can or should we see this as part of a, it's a bit worded funny, sorry Glenn, can or should we see this moving in what Brazil is calling deep participation? So should we be thinking about, I don't know if you know anything about this, Mhairi, perhaps you do or don't, but he's saying, you know, Brazil has something called deep participation, which is not just having a say, but it's where citizens are enabled to be more actively involved in shaping food systems and environments in an ongoing way.
Yeah.
Do you know anything about that model at all?
Yes, it's maybe not the same model that Glenn's talking about, but we have been investigating a couple of different models of one of them is called Polis. Maybe others on the call will know this, but it does allow many more people to then get involved in that conversation, and especially when we're talking about implementation, they're able to then kind of feed into this. It's like an online platform, feed into this and help shape policies and really give their views. We've investigated that as kind of maybe a way forward for this conversation. How do we keep the conversation going and involving as many people as possible? But I think it is also being used in research and potentially within government departments as well. I think they're running an environment consultation that's maybe using that as a model. So it's definitely a way forward and a way to make sure that we're genuinely hearing from everyone.
Thank you. Question from Caroline Seaman here. During these conversations, were public dining or community eating options raised as a solution? Nice specific question there.
There was I think it was it wasn't one of the key themes, but it was definitely posed in some locations, and as an alternative to that kind of convenient much more heavily processed offering, you know, what do we do instead? You know, there's often a question of, if we were to move away from the system as it is, what would we be left with, and who would actually be doing the cooking and the preparation? And you know, it kind of community dining or public diners is definitely a way forward for that. And yeah, it's definitely come from the citizens as well.
Thank you. I'm sort of jumping around now because there's a lot of different questions, so I hope you don't mind. We're kind of jumping from one bit. There's so many. What do you think citizens? Do you think citizens have a good understanding of the current agricultural system today? Do you
Mm,
think understand what's happening in it, what the challenges are?
yeah, I think what we saw was people coming to the conversation with concerns about farming. Um, and we were in some more rural locations where people, have farmers in their community or they're in their families, and maybe less so from the more urban locations that we went to. But as we went through the process, there was kind of greater talk about the need for fairness for farmers. I'd say that kind of in-depth understanding of what's really happening within the agricultural system, some definitely would, but some wouldn't. And it wasn't really the aim of this process to go in depth into agriculture. It would be wonderful to have a deliberation that ran specifically on agriculture, given what's happening at the moment and the government developing their 25-year roadmap. We could definitely see some benefit to this type of process. But yes, in terms of their understanding, I think it's their kind of personal connections and what they've seen in the media and what they've seen in their communities.
But there's a question here about the media, actually, which is probably a good one to do then. Nathan Nelson, he's asking about, I guess, the potentially the difference between, or is there a difference between what the kind of the conclusions that citizens came to through this process, where they were able to, really deliberate it, be presented with information, etc., and talk to each other, and whether that would be the same sort of reaction if it was if they weren't part of a process like that, but if they were just exposed to, just in everyday life, exposed to like, I don't know, some government announcement about a regulation on something or new research or that kind of thing, because he's saying he says, they may have been engaged in the process and understand the principles, but can we take from this that what public reaction would actually be to some of the changes suggested, especially when our media has the potential to stoke negative sentiment to things like food prices, reduction in meat, etc. Is this not part of the problem that the media are perpetuating the nanny state myth?
Yes. Yes, it is. It completely is. And I just think how polarized and distorted those messages become, looking for that kind of news angle. It's very difficult to judge public reaction to that message as opposed to what the policy is and what it intends to do. And there's very few opportunities, I think, currently for government to talk directly to citizens, and that has to change. And this type of process could facilitate that, but we do need to go further with that. What I would say though is that despite this kind of coverage of well, in general, people were still seeing the problems as they are and relating to them, their kind of own kind of experience, and able to say, I saw something in the news and I don't agree with that because this is what I experience. So it's not completely shaping what they say, but if the government is judging public sentiment through reaction to distorted headlines, then I strongly advise that they move away from that.
Or even I think there's often quite a lot of judging of public sentiment through what the headlines themselves are, which are obviously done by journalists looking for a story, like you said. If anyone is interested in looking at that more, there's Henry Dimbleby and Polly Van Tuken's piece on looking specifically at this as to why there has been no government action on the obesity crisis specifically, and like diet-related ill health, which talks a lot about the impact of the media, doesn't it? And
yeah,
nanny state kind of labeling. So yeah, I would definitely recommend it. It's on our website in our resource hub if anyone wants to find that. Question from Stephen Jacobs. I'm interested in learning about the level of awareness people have on food quality what are people's level of knowledge of the differences between low and high quality food? For example, the difference between fast food, chicken nuggets, and scratch cooking from, say, like organic ingredients. Nice to see you on here, Stephen. Stephen, part of the organic movement.
Oh, lovely. Yeah, I think that probably comes through most strongly in that how they discuss cheap food versus good food. And they're definitely drawing a distinction between what's healthy, what's nourishing, and what is unhealthy. And so fast food does come into their definition of unhealthy. They do talk about organic as well. I do remember some of the citizens talking about their own experience of buying and cooking with organic food. But that wasn't something that we talked to them in depth about. Yeah, it didn't come through in the conversations, but I'd say that there's definitely awareness between what is around them and how good that is for them, for the planet, and what they would like to be able to access instead, with all the complexity that comes around how they would actually cook and eat that.
Yeah. Well, talking about that, I'm just saying there's a thing from Christina Bigthage saying, what is UPF in the bar chart? Christina, it refers to ultra processed food. And then question just relating to what we're talking about, because of course power is such an important part of what the food that is around us. Rob Everett is asking, nearly all the harms of the food system can be traced to corporates. Did your conversations bring up the power of shareholders and if they can help to change them, relating to shareholder responsibility and ethics?
Yes, that's a wonderful question. I don't think that we did. We didn't that they weren't presented evidence on kind of the extent of corporate power or the tactics and strategies that companies use. How the citizens view power is in terms of money. And so they talk about, seeing headlines of retailer and big company profits in headlines, and they were relating that to the conversation they were having about, the amount of money that farmers then earn, or the amount of money that they have to spend on food. I think that would be wonderful to explore with them as kind of a way that they can take their learnings from the conversation forward, talking a lot more to shareholders and getting involved in that. But yeah, it's something that we covered in the conversation.
Okay, thank you. A couple of questions on meat.
Mm-hmm.
One from Robert Brooks. So it's kind of just teasing at what we've talked about already around meat, but a little bit more. With any reduction in red meat consumption, what did citizens want to eat instead? Did they understand where this might be produced? Were food imports discussed? And general kind of impact on the environment? So he's kind of asking about the alternatives and what I guess, Robert, I guess he's getting at the potential trade-offs there as well. And like you were saying earlier, processing around it. Yeah.
Yeah. I think, yeah, just on that point around trade and imports, that there was only so much that we could cover within this time, and talking around agriculture, nature, climate, that was one workshop for the citizens, so it naturally kind of had a cut off. But I would say that they did talk about meat and reducing how much meat they ate. They kind of wondered what they would eat. They talked about meat alternatives, but they also talked about just how to access more fruit and vegetables, and issues of seasonality, and what a different system would look like and what that would mean was available. But there was only so much that we could explore that kind of conversation of what they would do instead. They would kind of just understanding the impact of the system as it is, and what a different future could look like.
And there's a question following on from that a little bit more about did they talk at all? Do they want to talk at all about the difference between different quality of meat, so meat produced sustainable, ethical ways, and more industrialized kind of production methods? Is that something that they sort of understood or were interested in?
Yeah, I think, and yes, that probably does relate actually to an earlier question on kind of their idea of quality. And I'd said that there was an idea of, cheap food versus good food, but I think there was definitely a sense that the way that the system is working now, is bad for the soil. It's bad for the food that the animals are then able to eat, and what does that mean for us when we're eating it? Yeah, I think there's definitely a sense that, or an understanding rather, how this all interconnects and how we produce food and what that means, what ends up on the table and what we eat. But yeah, probably quite a broad level understanding there.
Yeah, thank you. We've got about three more really good questions here that I just want to cover. What really good one from Chantal says, some citizens we engage with cannot cook from scratch. I'm guessing she's working with some kind of community group. Some are time poor, for example, working long hours plus having caring responsibilities, or are too unwell. Is there a place for improved versions of, for example, ready meals or more lightly processed shelf-stable produce?
Yeah, absolutely. And that did come up in the conversations as well, people sharing of just, people with caring responsibilities or, talking about energy and the price involved with cooking their own food. And there's many more perspectives outside of that as well. But I do think that, there are examples of smaller businesses that are working to produce food that, meets government regulations, that if they were to be implemented, things around, levels of salt and sugar in them, but also foods that are just much higher in fruits, vegetables, proteins, whole grains. There are examples of smaller companies out there, but it's the long-term viability that's the issue, and where they find their market and the cost of that as well. That is then another gap in cost that people need to reach to. So I would say that there are examples out there, and it would require very careful regulation to open up the supply chains and create a much more diverse food industry, so that people could access that type of food, more often.
Do people talk at all about government mechanisms that could help sort of almost incentivize companies to produce more healthy, sort of, ready meals, that kind of thing?
Yeah, I think probably more generally they talk about the need for kind of almost a suite of regulation or regulations that can work together and reinforce each other. Within that, taxes as well on bad practices. And I think there was mention as well of incentives for companies that can do better, but whether that's a reduction in business rates, for example, or other incentives, we didn't have the time to get fully into that with them. But there's definitely, I think, a wish for smart regulation that would work together and reinforce each other.
Yeah. Question about food security, Mhairi, from Anne Owen. Did any of the citizens bring up concerns about security of the food, UK's food supply and lack of national preparedness for the eventuality of disruption or supply? Are they concerned about this in any way? Is this something that came up in conversations?
I think it probably came up most strongly when they were talking about local food systems and the need for the local systems to feel stronger, for more investment, and bringing a sense of, they didn't use the term resilience, but that's what they were talking about, is just bringing resilience to their local areas, to their communities. Well, there was some discussion around, that this is a global food system that we're within. What can the UK do within a global system? But also, when there's such a concentration of companies and brands and dominance of supply chains, if something goes wrong, then that would affect us in some way. So there's definitely an awareness there. Obviously not to the level of a Tim Lang report, but definitely an appreciation of how secure are we really within the system.
something to build on potentially.
Yeah.
A really good last question, I think, to end on from Nathan Nelson. Could the food conversation have real value in the future as a mechanism to build food literacy in communities, to kind of continue those conversations as a way of just, everyone understanding what's happening better?
I would really hope so. I think that that's what we're focused on, is continuing these local conversations, community conversations that are happening, even now. They will continue into the future, and we do hope to be able to resource that effort and make sure that that it becomes an infrastructure or a movement for these conversations to keep happening.
Great. Well, thank you. We'll watch this space. Your report is out next week, is that right?
It's due out next week. Yes, we haven't got a firm date next week, but please do watch out for it then. There's much more information in the report.
And where can if people can find it on the website and sign up for emails, that kind of thing?
That's right. Yes, we do have a newsletter. We're also on LinkedIn, on Blue Sky, and Instagram as well. So please do follow us there. All of our updates are posted there.
Great. Thanks so much, Mhairi. And thank you for your time, because it's quite hard work presenting and answering questions for this amount of time. Done nearly an hour and a half. So yeah, my brain is a bit tired now. I'm sure yours is. So really big thank you for doing that, for sharing your results ahead of the publication of the report as well. We've been recording this, obviously, so we'll be putting it on YouTube with Mhairi's permission. Mhairi might ask if we can share your slides at all with people, maybe have a think about that.
Sure.
We'll be sending it out on email to everyone, so look out for that. And if you wouldn't mind, John will just share some links again in the chat. If you could just take 3 minutes just to rate this webinar, it really help us. It's not to rate Mhairi, just to be clear. I don't want to put you on the spot like that, but as many of you know, AFN funding is due to end at the end of this year. So if we can collect more evidence to show why we need to continue in some way, it's just be really helpful to us. So if you wouldn't mind filling that in, that would be great. We have got quite a lot of webinars coming up in the offing. The next one will be same sort of time of the month in May. Not sure which one we've got next, but some of the topics coming up are things like trade-offs and opportunities for animal welfare and net zero. What can we learn from past agri-food system transformations? What can local councils do to help transition our food system, which obviously we've been talking about a bit today. How do we de-risk farm business transitions, including with collective insurance? So a few topics coming up there. So yeah, thank you everybody for your contributions, questions, chats, joining from wherever you are. And Mhairi, thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Jez.
Thanks. Bye bye.
Bye.